Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us, because we're going to be unpacking something literally life-changing. We are looking at a powerful psychological off switch for workplace stress. If you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by your job or kind of trapped by your finances, the breakdown we're going through today gives you a literal roadmap right out of that cycle. We're going to see how hitting one specific financial threshold completely rewires your entire relationship with work.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the Sunday night dread, and that terrible feeling of being trapped. To understand how this all works, we've got to start with a reality that is unfortunately way too familiar for a lot of us.
Picture this scene from the source material. It's Sunday night and that cold, familiar pit is just starting to form in your stomach. Suddenly your phone pings. It's an urgent email from a boss who, let's be real, has spent the last 6 months making your life kind of a living hell. And in that instant, it hits you. You have to walk right back into that toxic environment in less than 12 hours. For most folks, that moment triggers a massive visceral wave of financial panic. And why? Because you realize, looking at your bank account, you simply cannot afford to say no to their unreasonable demands.
But hold on, I want you to pause and imagine something totally different for a second. What if there was a literal off switch for that dread? Seriously, imagine if there was a specific, achievable dollar amount sitting right there in your bank account that could completely neutralize this anxiety. An amount that takes that Sunday night panic and turns it into, well, just quiet indifference.
Now, before we reveal that magic number, we really need to define what's actually happening to you when you don't have it. You become what the source calls a captive audience. See, when you're living paycheck to paycheck, you are financially unable to say no. You are effectively trapped. Trapped by the bank, trapped by the dealership holding your car loan, and, most directly, trapped by your employer. In this dynamic, your boss holds absolutely all the cards, simply because you are a captive audience to their paycheck.
Okay, let's dive into Section 2, the biology of being broke and operating in survival mode. Let's unpack the underlying mechanics of why being in this position feels so incredibly devastating. Here's the deal. When you have zero savings, your brain operates in pure survival mode. Every single financial decision, like, figuring out if buying groceries means eating ramen for the rest of the week, is filtered entirely through fear and scarcity. Your mental bandwidth is just totally consumed by immediate threats. Now contrast that with breathing room. This is where that constant, low-level panic is finally replaced by absolute peace. You actually reclaim your mental bandwidth to think about your future rather than just barely surviving your present.
So the big question, how do we actually get to that breathing room? Well, a lot of financial gurus will insist you need like $1 million to be truly free, but the mathematics of peace actually starts way earlier than that. Your very first major milestone, it's just $10,000. That is your initial breathing room buffer.
And having this initial cash reserve fundamentally changes how you experience life's inevitable emergencies. When you've got that $10,000 buffer, a sudden $3,000 car repair, or maybe an unexpected trip to the emergency room, it isn't a catastrophic, life-altering disaster anymore. It simply becomes a minor inconvenience. You just write the check, and you move on with your life. Boom, crisis neutralized.
And the data totally backs up just how powerful this is. Research actually shows that just having this small buffer can increase your financial well-being by 21%. Why? Because it actively lowers your cortisol levels. That's your body's primary stress hormone. You are literally making yourself biologically healthier and happier just by establishing this financial floor. How wild is that?
All right, let's move to and see how this builds in Section 3, the $20,000 threshold. This is where we shift from playing defense to playing offense.
This right here is the magic number, $20,000. When you cross this specific threshold, the entire dynamic fundamentally shifts. This is the exact point where the rules of the game change completely. You stop operating from a place of desperation. Now, you aren't being reckless, but you are absolutely no longer completely dependent on the immediate goodwill of a toxic boss.
And this introduces a brilliant concept, walking away money. A $20,000 foundation allows you to literally quit your job tomorrow and survive for months while you find something way better. But hey, here's what's really interesting about this. You don't even have to actually spend the money for it to work. Just knowing that cash is sitting right there acts as an invisible barrier against workplace toxicity. It completely changes your entire demeanor.
When you know you've got walking away money, these amazing downstream effects just start happening automatically. First, you walk into meetings differently, right? You ask for that raise without fear, because the absolute worst they can say is no, and guess what? You'll be totally fine either way. Second, you push back on toxic behavior because you aren't terrified of the consequences anymore. And third, and this is super ironic, This newfound confidence actually often results in better job offers and higher pay. People really notice when you're negotiating from a position of absolute strength instead of fear. So, if this is all so powerful, why do so few people ever reach it? Well, it comes down to Section 4, the success mirage, and the illusion of adulting.
Society loves to tell you that you need, say, a $70,000 gleaming truck or a $500,000 starter home just to be considered successful. But the reality? The person sitting in that flashy car is often the one who's the most highly stressed about money, just frantically scrambling to keep up appearances. Now compare that to the person driving the reliable, used Honda. They are quietly building their walking away money, and I guarantee you they are sleeping super soundly at night.
I really want you to absorb this striking quote from our source material. It says that $900 car payment is actually a form of automotive indentured servitude that keeps you trapped in a job you hate. Wow. The automotive industry spends literally billions on identity marketing just to convince you that your vehicle is who you are. But in reality, giving into that mirage is basically just buying yourself a one-way ticket to stay in the survival mode simulator forever.
So how do we finally break free from all that? It requires Section 5, true wealth is freedom, and fundamentally shifting your identity.
The absolutely crucial point here is that reaching this $20,000 milestone, it isn't just about the math. It requires a radical identity shift. You have to actively choose to become the type of person who values your future autonomy way more than today's fleeting social status. Once you hit that number, your financial boulder has basically crested the hill. You've changed who you are at a fundamental level.
All right, let's quickly summarize our core takeaways from this explainer. If you're feeling trapped right now, you need to stop looking at what the bank says you qualify for and start looking at what you can genuinely afford while you build up your foundation. Remember, real wealth isn't equity in a depreciating truck that's actively destroying your future. Real wealth is the untouchable freedom to look a toxic boss dead in the eye and say no. Stop playing defense and start building your foundation.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought as we wrap up today's explainer. Every single time you make a financial decision, you are standing at a crossroads. So you really have to ask yourself, will you choose today's status or tomorrow's freedom? That power, that $20,000 off switch, it's waiting for you. It's time to start building it. Thanks so much for learning with me today.